In June 1998, investigators in the state of Rhode Island were trying to answer a strange question. For months, casinos in the region had been steadily losing money, yet no one knew why. Security cameras showed no signs of theft. Employees displayed no evidence of cheating. Internal control systems detected no malfunctions. Everything seemed perfectly normal. After numerous investigations, authorities discovered that the culprit was neither a hacker nor an organized crime syndicate, but a mechanic named Louis Colavecchio. What made the case famous was the unusual method he used. Louis did not carry weapons, break into buildings, or attack computer systems. Instead, he used his mechanical expertise to create counterfeit coins with astonishing precision and exploited a weakness in slot machines. For a long time, the scheme worked so effectively that many casinos had no idea anything unusual was happening. But as investigators slowly pieced together scattered clues, they uncovered one of the strangest fraud cases in the history of the American gambling industry. So how did Louis Colavecchio carry out his plan, and what transformed an ordinary mechanic into the nightmare of casinos across the country? To understand how Louis Colavecchio carried out this scheme, we need to go back many years before his name appeared in newspaper headlines. Louis Colavecchio was born and raised in Rhode Island, a small state in the northeastern United States. Unlike many notorious criminals who came from gangs or had criminal records from a young age, Louis lived a relatively ordinary life. From an early age, he showed a special fascination with machines and mechanical parts. While many of his peers spent their time on entertainment, Louis preferred taking things apart to understand how they worked. He was fascinated by the precision of gears, metal components, and complex mechanisms. As he grew older, Louis chose to pursue a career in machining. For years, he worked with lathes, cutting machines, and metalworking equipment. The job allowed him to develop a skill that very few people possessed: the ability to manufacture metal parts with an extremely high level of precision. People who worked with Louis often acknowledged that he was highly skilled. He understood how to select materials, how to machine metal, and above all, he was incredibly patient with even the smallest details. However, like many working people, life was not always easy for Louis. Financial difficulties began to appear as the economy changed and steady work became harder to find. It was during this period that a bold idea began to take shape in his mind. As someone who frequently visited casinos, Louis noticed that slot machines operated using coins with very specific sizes and weights. That observation sparked his curiosity. He began asking himself a simple question. Could these machines really tell the difference between a genuine coin and one that had been perfectly manufactured? At first, it was merely the curiosity of a skilled mechanic. But over time, that curiosity evolved into a plan that would eventually cost casinos across America a great deal of money. After weeks of preparation, Louis decided it was time to find out whether his plan was actually possible. He took a few coins he had manufactured himself and drove to a local casino. Outside, everything seemed perfectly normal. Customers came and went, and the sound of slot machines echoed throughout the gaming floor. No one paid attention to the middle-aged man quietly walking through the entrance. Louis chose a machine in a relatively quiet area. He sat down, took a deep breath, and pulled a coin from his pocket. At that moment, all of his efforts rested on a single test. The machine rejected it. The entire plan would end right there. But if it accepted the coin, everything would change. He dropped the coin into the slot. A few seconds passed. The screen lit up. Credits were added to the machine. No warning appeared. No unusual signal was triggered. The machine had accepted the coin as if it were genuine. Louis tried to remain calm, but deep down he understood exactly what had just happened. The system that casinos had trusted for years had failed to detect the difference. Still, one successful attempt was not enough to prove anything. Over the following weeks, he continued testing his coins at different locations. The results were almost always the same. The coins he had created repeatedly passed the machine's verification process. As his doubts gradually disappeared, confidence began to take their place. What had once been a bold idea had now become a real opportunity to make money. Louis no longer wondered whether it would work. Instead, he began asking himself a different question. If a few coins worked, what would happen if he started producing them on a much larger scale? After realizing that his plan could actually work, Louis began approaching it in a much more organized way. No longer viewed it as a personal experiment. His goal now was to turn it into a steady source of income. Over the following months, Louis traveled from one casino to another. Instead of focusing on a single location, he spread his activities across multiple venues to avoid attracting attention. Each time he visited, The amount of money he won was relatively small. That made the losses difficult to notice among the millions of dollars flowing through casinos every day. The strategy worked. Money began to flow in steadily. Small winnings gradually accumulated into significant amounts. While casino operators believed business was running normally, Louis was quietly profiting from the weakness he had discovered as time passed. His initial caution slowly gave way to confidence, expanded the scale of his operation. His visits to casinos became more frequent, and the money he brought home continued to grow. Every time he walked out of a casino with profits in hand, Louis became even more convinced that he had found a method that was almost impossible to detect. It was a dangerous mindset that many criminals had fallen into before. When things go smoothly for a long time, people often begin to believe they will never get caught. But on the other side, some casino managers had started noticing unusual discrepancies in their accounting systems. The numbers no longer matched up as perfectly as they once had. First, the differences were extremely small, so small that many people dismissed them as simple operational errors. However, as the same pattern continued to appear at different times, a troubling question began to emerge. Was this merely a technical problem, or was someone exploiting a weakness that no one had yet discovered? That question would soon trigger an investigation that would last for years and eventually bring authorities closer to Louis Colavecchio. The initial suspicions inside the casinos quickly turned into genuine concern. Accounting reports kept showing unexplained discrepancies. There were no signs of break-ins. No employees had been caught stealing. Security systems appeared to be functioning normally. Yet money was still disappearing. Management at several casinos decided to launch internal investigations. They reviewed surveillance footage, checked transaction records, and examined every operational procedure. The results only left them more confused. There was no clear evidence pointing to a specific culprit. Meanwhile, Louis continued his operation. He believed his method was sophisticated enough to bypass every layer of security. A long string of successful runs gradually lowered his guard over time. That was exactly when the risks began to increase. In several casinos, security specialists noticed a pattern appearing in multiple incidents. Whenever losses occurred, certain coins or tokens with unusual characteristics would turn up in the system. At first, it seemed like a minor detail. But the deeper they investigated, the more they realized that these coins were not completely identical to officially issued tokens. The differences were nearly impossible to detect with the naked eye. Only after careful examination did experts discover signs suggesting that the pieces had been manufactured outside official channels. The discovery immediately changed the direction of the investigation. Casinos stopped focusing on the possibility of internal errors. Instead, they began to believe that someone was producing counterfeit tokens of exceptionally high quality. The information was quickly passed on to law enforcement authorities. Federal investigators joined the case. This was no longer just a problem for the gambling industry. If someone possessed the ability to manufacture large quantities of counterfeit tokens that were almost indistinguishable from genuine ones, the damage could spread across multiple states. Special task force was established. Suspicious tokens collected from different casinos were gathered for comparison. Transaction records were compiled. Surveillance footage from numerous locations was reviewed hour by hour. Gradually, one name began appearing more frequently than the others. That name was Louis Colavecchio. At this point, he still had no idea that he had become a target of investigators. But Louis's time as a free man was slowly coming to an end. Because for the first time in many years of operation, the people pursuing him had finally found a real lead. After identifying Louis Colavecchio as their primary suspect, the FBI quietly began monitoring his activities. Investigators compared Louis's travel history with the casinos where counterfeit tokens had appeared. The results revealed a suspicious pattern. At many of the locations where losses had occurred, Louis had been there shortly beforehand. The investigation then expanded into his past. The FBI discovered that Louis had spent years working with metal and precision machinery. These were exactly the kinds of skills needed to manufacture counterfeit tokens of exceptionally high quality. Despite growing suspicions, the agents still lacked direct evidence. They needed to locate the place where the tokens were being produced, along with the equipment used to make them. For months, the FBI quietly gathered additional information. New leads gradually emerged, and all of them pointed to the same man, Louis Colavecchio. By this point, investigators believed they were getting very close to the truth. A carefully planned raid was prepared. If successful, it would bring an end to a counterfeit token operation that had been running for years. And when the search warrant was finally approved, Louis's game had entered its final days. One morning, FBI agents and law enforcement officers suddenly executed a search warrant against Louis Colavecchio. For years, investigators had been trying to uncover the source of the counterfeit tokens that had appeared in casinos. Now, they finally had the opportunity to confirm their suspicions. As they entered Louis's workspace, the agents quickly discovered metalworking equipment, molds, and specialized machining tools. But the most shocking evidence was yet to come. Investigators found a large number of unused tokens along with various materials used in the manufacturing process. These discoveries allowed the FBI to piece together the puzzle they had been pursuing for years. For the agents, this was the breakthrough that would decide the case. Louis was arrested shortly afterward. The man who had caused headaches for so many casinos was finally forced to face the legal system. However, his battle was not over yet. After news of the arrest became public, people began asking a major question. How had Louis managed to fool casinos and their sophisticated security systems for so many years? The answer would emerge during the upcoming trial. After his arrest, Louis Colavecchio was formally brought before a federal court. Prosecutors presented a wide range of evidence that the FBI had gathered over years of investigation. From manufacturing equipment and molds to the counterfeit tokens that had been seized, everything was included in the case file. According to the prosecution, Louis had built a sophisticated counterfeiting operation and earned substantial amounts of money by introducing these tokens into casino systems. Meanwhile, his defense attorneys attempted to reduce his level of responsibility. However, the sheer amount of evidence collected by investigators made it extremely difficult to challenge the case against him. The trial quickly attracted widespread media attention. Many people were astonished to learn that a single individual had managed to outsmart casinos for such a long period of time. For the gambling industry, the case served as a serious warning. Casinos began reviewing their internal control systems and upgrading their token verification procedures and security measures in an effort to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. Eventually, the court delivered its verdict against Louis Colavecchio. The man once known as the master of counterfeit tokens was forced to pay the price for what he had done. But the most remarkable aspect of the case was not the sentence itself. Its greatest legacy was the way it transformed the casino industry, forcing gambling establishments to re-examine vulnerabilities they had once believed no one could exploit. The verdict brought the case to a close, but the story of Louis Colavecchio continued to be discussed for many years afterward. Once a highly skilled craftsman, Louis chose to use his talents in a very different direction. Instead of creating legitimate products, he decided to exploit weaknesses in casino systems to make money. For a long time, the plan proved successful. The counterfeit tokens he produced with astonishing precision allowed him to fool numerous casinos, and it took investigators years to uncover the truth. However, like many famous criminal cases, success only lasts for so long as the operation grew larger. More traces began to appear. Initial suspicions gradually turned into a full-scale investigation, eventually leading FBI agents right to his doorstep. The price he paid was not limited to a criminal sentence. His reputation, his freedom, and the remaining years of his life were all affected by the decisions he had made. Today, the case of Louis Colavecchio is still remembered as one of the most notorious casino token counterfeiting schemes in American history. He demonstrated that even systems believed to be heavily protected can still contain vulnerabilities. But at the same time, the story proved something else. No matter how sophisticated a plan may be, hiding it forever is almost impossible. Sooner or later, even the smallest mistakes can become the clues that bring down an entire operation. And that is how Louis Colavecchio's journey came to an end. Not with a victory over the system, but with a lesson that has appeared in countless famous cases throughout history. When greed goes beyond its limits, the price to pay is often far greater than the rewards once gained.